The jungle was silent. No birds, no wind, no warning, just a single Viet Cong sentry standing in the dark. And then he was gone. He never heard the four shadows moving toward him. No footsteps, no whispered orders, no smell of cigarettes or bug spray like the Americans. Only a gloved hand and a knife. 90 seconds later, every guard in the camp was dead. By 4 a.m., the entire Viet Cong base, 18 fighters, weapons, supplies, a radio station, was wiped out. No gunfire, no survivors, only bodies placed in a strange pattern. A silent message. The Viet Cong would soon learn the truth. The Australian SAS had arrived. These men didn't fight like normal soldiers. They moved like smoke. They struck without sound. They disappeared without a trace. Even the Americans, with their helicopters, artillery, and high-tech power, didn't understand how these ghosts operated. But soon, everyone in Vietnam would know. This is the story of the Special Forces unit that the Viet Cong feared more than the American war machine. The story of the men who mastered the jungle and made the hunters feel hunted. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe. We're on our way to 20,000 subscribers, and most viewers aren't subscribed yet. Your support helps bring these forgotten war stories back to life. Now let's begin. When the Australian SAS arrived in Vietnam, the Americans were confused. They respected them, yes, but they didn't understand them. America fought war with power, big operations, big noise, big numbers. If the Viet Cong were out there, the American answer was simple. Find them, surround them, and destroy them with overwhelming firepower. Helicopters thundered across the sky. Artillery shook the ground. Infantry battalions pushed through the jungle like a moving wall. To American commanders, this was how modern war should be fought. But the SAS looked at the same war and saw something completely different. They had come from years of fighting communist insurgents in Malaya. They learned that you don't beat guerrillas by being louder, stronger, or bigger. You beat them by understanding them, by watching them, by thinking like them. Where Americans pushed through the jungle in platoons, the SAS slipped through it in teams of 4. Where Americans measured success by body counts, the SAS measured it by information. Where Americans used radios and shouted commands, the SAS used hand signals and silence. To the Americans, it felt slow, too slow. To the SAS, it was survival. One American officer famously said, "We want to find the enemy and kill him." The Australian reply was calm. "We want to understand him first, then remove him efficiently." 2 armies, 2 strategies, 2 philosophies colliding in the same brutal jungle. And soon the results would prove one of them right. Long before the Australian SAS set foot in Vietnam, they had already fought a war that shaped them into the perfect jungle hunters. From 1948 to 1960, they battled communist guerrillas in the deep rainforests of Malaya. It was a long, slow, exhausting conflict, exactly the kind of war most armies hate. But for the SAS, it became their classroom. In Malaya, they learned the one lesson that would define everything they later did in Vietnam. Patience wins. Noise kills. They learned how to move through thick jungle without breaking a single branch. How to track enemies by tiny signs. Bent grass, warm ashes, disturbed soil. How to stay hidden for hours without moving, even when insects crawled across their faces. How to fight small, smart, and silent. They didn't chase the enemy. They waited for the enemy to reveal himself. By the time Vietnam began, the SAS had over a decade of experience fighting the exact same kind of opponent. Fast, hidden, unpredictable guerrillas. But there was one more thing they mastered, something the Americans almost completely ignored: hearts and minds. In Malaya, the SAS learned that to defeat an insurgency, you don't just kill fighters. You learn the land. You learn the people. You study the enemy until you understand him better than he understands himself. So when the SAS arrived in Vietnam in 1966, they weren't starting from zero. They were arriving as seasoned jungle specialists, men shaped by a war that taught them discipline, silence, and patience on a level few soldiers ever reach. The Viet Cong had fought the French. They had fought South Vietnamese forces. They were now fighting Americans. But they had never faced hunters like this. and soon they would feel the difference. When the SAS began patrolling the Vietnamese jungle, the Viet Cong quickly realized something terrifying. These soldiers did not move like normal humans. American patrols were big, 30 to 40 men, heavy gear, loud radios, branches snapping under their boots. The SAS moved in teams of 4 or 6, small enough to disappear, small enough to strike and be gone before anyone understood what happened. They walked slow, so slow that one American once joked, "I thought they were standing still." But that slow movement meant safety. It meant silence. It meant control. Every step mattered. Every sound mattered. Every decision mattered. They used hand signals only. No whispering. No radio unless absolutely necessary. A single cough could give away a position, so patrol members practiced holding one in until tears ran from their eyes. Their gear was lighter too. An American platoon needed resupply every 2 to 3 days. An SAS team could stay out 2 weeks on what they carried on their backs. Their weapons showed their mindset. Americans loved automatic fire, the M16 spraying rounds into the trees. The SAS preferred semi-automatic rifles and suppressed Sterlings. Not many bullets, just the right bullets. And while American units looked for big fights, the SAS looked for information. An SAS patrol could watch a trail for 16 hours straight, unmoving, waiting for a single enemy to walk by, just to see which direction he came from. They weren't hunting bodies. They were hunting understanding, because understanding meant power. Where the VC slept, where they stored rice, where their commanders met, where their tunnels started and ended. This was the difference. Americans fought the jungle. The SAS lived in it. Americans wanted contact. The SAS avoided it, unless they chose the moment. And every hour they spent in that jungle, the Viet Cong's biggest advantage slowly became their biggest fear. The jungle was no longer theirs. Someone else owned it now. It didn't take long before the Americans realized something strange. Every time they swept through an area with hundreds of troops, helicopters, and artillery, they found nothing. No camps, no supplies, no fighters. But when a 4-man SAS patrol entered the same area days later, they found everything. One of the earliest examples became famous inside intelligence circles. In late 1966, an American battalion carried out a massive search and destroy operation. Hundreds of soldiers spent days moving through thick jungle. They searched every trail, every clearing, every bunker. They found 0 Viet Cong. They reported the area clean. Then an Australian SAS patrol entered that same jungle. 4 men, no noise, no trail, no rush. In 12 days, moving less than 8 kilometers total, they discovered 3 Viet Cong base camps, multiple supply routes, a battalion headquarters, weapons caches, rice storage sites, command notes and documents. They even coordinated precision airstrikes that wiped out months of Viet Cong logistics, all without firing a shot themselves. This moment changed everything. American commanders began asking, how did we miss this? How did they find it? The answer was simple. The SAS didn't look for the enemy. They waited for the enemy to reveal himself. They didn't chase shadows. They listened to the jungle until the shadows moved. And for the first time, the Viet Cong realized someone was watching them in a way they had never experienced before. Someone who understood their routes, their habits, their weaknesses. The ghosts were learning the jungle faster than its own masters, and soon they would make a discovery that shocked the entire American military. In early 1966, the Americans launched Operation Crimp, a massive attack into the Ho Bo Woods, one of the most dangerous Viet Cong strongholds in South Vietnam. Helicopters filled the sky. Artillery hammered the tree line. Hundreds of American soldiers pushed forward in a huge wall of noise and firepower. If the Viet Cong were there, the Americans would crush them. That was the plan. But when the smoke cleared and the infantry swept the area, they found almost nothing. No fighters, no weapons, no camps. It didn't make sense until the Australians walked in. A small SAS patrol moved through the same jungle, slowly, silently, scanning every inch of the ground. Then Trooper Danny Smith noticed something tiny, a patch of dirt that looked just a little too fresh. He signaled his team. They froze. The patrol commander, Corporal Bob Bottle Battelle crawled forward and brushed away loose soil. What he uncovered shocked the world. It wasn't a foxhole. It wasn't a bunker. It was the entrance to a tunnel system, the first doorway into what would later become known as the Ku Chai Tunnels, a hidden underground city stretching more than 200 kilometers. Hospitals, weapons factories, sleeping quarters, command centers, entire living communities, all beneath the feet of American troops who never knew they were there. The Americans tried sending tunnel rats inside, brave volunteers who crawled through tight passages with only a flashlight and a pistol. But the SAS used a smarter approach. Map the entrances, identify air vents, pump in CS gas, collapse the tunnels at key points, enter only when absolutely necessary, never alone. This discovery changed the war. It proved the Viet Cong were not simply hiding in the jungle. They were living under it. And it also proved something else. The Americans had been marching over enemy headquarters for months, without even knowing. But the SAS knew, because they didn't just look at the jungle, they read it. And now the Viet Cong understood that their greatest secret was no longer safe. The ghosts had found the doorway into the underworld, and they weren't done yet. By mid-1966, Viet Cong commanders began hearing stories that didn't sound real. Stories of small enemy teams that moved like shadows, that appeared without warning, that vanished without a trace. But these weren't stories. These were SAS patrols. And the legend was just beginning. The 43-minute freeze one afternoon, an SAS patrol led by Sergeant Jim Campbell was hidden beside a narrow jungle trail. Suddenly, a 20-man Viet Cong unit appeared, far too many for a direct fight. The normal rule was clear: break contact and escape quietly. But Campbell made a decision that became SAS history. He signaled his men, "Don't move, don't breathe, don't blink." The Viet Cong stopped 30 meters from their position. They sat down, smoked cigarettes, talked, rested, completely unaware that 4 Australians were lying in the grass right beside them. The SAS stayed frozen for 43 minutes. In any normal army, someone would sneeze, shift, cough. But the SAS had trained for moments exactly like this. When the Viet Cong finally moved on, the patrol silently followed them for 2 kilometers, straight to their base camp. That night, Campbell radioed the coordinates. The next morning, artillery and airstrikes wiped the camp from the map. The VC never knew how they had been found. Tracking like hunters. Another patrol led by Lieutenant John White did something even more terrifying. For 5 days, they tracked a Viet Cong leadership group through the jungle. Not by trails, not by footprints, but by tiny signs. Bent grass, moved leaves, soil patterns. White's team became so close that they could hear the Viet Cong speaking at night. They mapped every movement, learned every routine, and located the exact command structure. The intelligence allowed a coordinated ambush that killed 17 key VC leaders, including 2 senior commanders. But the psychological blow was even bigger. At the ambush site, the SAS left a note in Vietnamese. "We've been watching you." For guerrilla fighters who believed they were the invisible hunters, this message was devastating. By August 1966, VC reports described a new enemy they didn't understand. Small teams, unpredictable, silent, deadly, always one step ahead. They called them ghosts for a reason. The SAS didn't just kill. They observed, they learned, they hunted, and they controlled the jungle in a way the Viet Cong had never experienced. The legend was no longer growing. It was spreading like fear. By late 1966, something strange was happening inside Viet Cong units. They were changing their behavior, not because of American firepower, not because of helicopters or artillery, but because of 4-man SAS patrols they almost never saw. The Viet Cong had always been the masters of fear. They controlled the jungle. They moved silently. They chose when and where to fight. But now they were the ones being hunted. The VC start to panic. In areas where the SAS operated, Viet Cong commanders suddenly ordered new rules. No more using regular trails. Move camp every 3 days instead of every week. Double the number of sentries. Never travel alone, even to the latrine. Report any strange sound, footprint, or broken leaf. These changes were not tactical improvements. They were signs of paranoia. Every rustle in the trees, every snapped twig, every shadow might be the SAS, and that fear slowed them down, drained their energy, and made operations harder. Exactly what the SAS wanted. Step-up ambushes breaking the enemy's mind. One of the most terrifying SAS tactics was the step-up ambush. A Viet Cong squad is ambushed on a trail. They run. But as they flee, they hit a second ambush. More chaos, more casualties. The survivors panic and follow their training. Fall back to the rally point, but the SAS is already there too. Ambush number 3. After 3 consecutive ambushes on what should have been safe routes, many Viet Cong started doing something unthinkable for guerrilla fighters. They surrendered rather than run. Their trust in their own jungle, their own instincts, their own training was breaking. Fear becomes the real weapon won. Former VC commander later said, "We feared the SAS because we never saw them, only their results." This was psychological warfare at its highest level. The SAS didn't just beat the Viet Cong in firefights. They made them doubt the jungle, doubt their leaders, doubt their own survival. And once fear spreads, you don't need to fire many bullets. The jungle does the work for you. While the Australians were mastering the jungle, another group quietly shaped their success. The British SAS advisors. These men came from brutal counter-insurgency wars in Borneo and Malaya, and they brought skills that were even sharper than what the Americans expected. They were older, calmer, and extremely experienced in jungle warfare. They taught the Australians how to move even slower, track even deeper, read jungle signs that normal soldiers never notice, plan operations that depended on silence, not firepower, but they also taught something else, something that would never officially appear in military reports: how to cross borders without being caught. Claret-style operations. Missions that never happened in Borneo, the British SAS used secret cross-border raids known as Operation Claret. These missions targeted enemy camps across the Indonesian border, missions the government publicly denied. When the same British advisors came to Vietnam, they brought that mindset with them. Soon, small SAS teams began performing similar operations, quietly crossing into Cambodia, watching Viet Cong sanctuary camps, mapping supply routes that the Americans weren't allowed to touch, striking key targets, then disappearing back into Vietnam before anyone realized no uniforms, no flags, no recognition. If they were caught, they didn't exist. For decades, these missions were classified. Even many Australian soldiers never knew they happened. But inside Viet Cong camps, rumors spread like wildfire. The ghosts can cross borders. They can follow us anywhere. These secret operations frightened the Viet Cong in a new way. The Americans were limited by political rules. The SAS was not. And the message was clear: there was no safe zone anymore, not even outside Vietnam. This was the moment when American units began asking for SAS training, because they realized the war they were fighting was not the war the SAS was fighting, and the ghosts were winning. By 1967, American commanders finally understood something important. If you want to survive in the Vietnamese jungle, you don't learn from a textbook. You learn from the Australians. The U.S. Army had strength, firepower, helicopters, and endless resources, but they did not have the quiet skills needed to find guerrillas who lived, moved, and fought in the total silence. So the Americans asked for help, and the SAS began teaching them. The birth of LRP and MACV-SOG tactics. American units sent their best men to train with the Australians. Long-range patrol teams, LRP, special forces groups, MACV-SOG, America's most secret covert unit. The training shocked many Americans. The SAS didn't teach them how to shoot more. They didn't teach them how to run faster. They didn't teach them how to carry bigger guns. They taught them how to slow down, how to move one step every 10 seconds. Watch the ground before watching the trees. Read footprints like a map. Use silence as a weapon. Fight only when the moment was perfect. Escape without leaving a single sign behind. For some Americans, this style felt unnatural. Their culture rewarded aggression, contact, and big engagements. But the ones who adapted, the ones who truly listened, became some of the most effective U.S. operators of the entire war. MACV-SOG, in particular, adopted SAS methods almost completely. Small teams, deep reconnaissance, surgical raids, minimal noise, maximum intelligence value. One American operator, Billy Waugh, said it best: "The SAS didn't just teach us how to fight, they taught us how to think." The impact was huge. U.S. units trained by the SAS began succeeding in missions where others failed. The jungle stopped being an enemy and became something they could understand. And for the first time, the Viet Cong realized they were no longer only hunted by the Australians. The Americans were learning the ghost way too. By 1968, the Australian SAS had done something almost impossible in Vietnam. They created constant eyes in the jungle. Their patrols were always out, always watching, always listening, always gathering information that no helicopter, no radio, and no American battalion could find. So when the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army began preparing for their massive surprise attack, the Tet Offensive, most U.S. bases had no idea what was coming, but the Australians did. Early warnings that saved lives in Phuoc Tuy province, SAS patrols noticed something unusual. More movement at night, extra messengers on jungle trails, new weapon stockpiles, units regrouping where they normally never gathered, strange meetings between local VC cells. They didn't attack. They didn't reveal themselves. They simply watched and reported everything. Weeks before Tet began, the Australian task force started building stronger defensive positions, adding obstacles, increasing readiness. So when the offensive finally exploded across Vietnam, over 100 cities attacked at once. American bases everywhere were caught off guard, but the Australians were ready. The SAS had given them time. Time to prepare. Time to survive. While other bases fell or were overrun, the Australian sector held firm with minimal casualties. The difference was not firepower. It wasn't bigger guns. It wasn't more soldiers. It wasn't luck. It was intelligence. Information gathered by 4 to 6 men lying silent in the dark, watching enemy movements long before the enemy ever imagined an attack. And this moment proved something crystal clear. A handful of SAS operators could do what entire American divisions could not. They understood the jungle. They understood the enemy. They saw the storm before it arrived. The ghosts were no longer just feared. They were respected, even by the armies fighting beside them. By the end of their Vietnam mission, the Australian SAS had achieved numbers that didn't seem real. Not for a small force, not for 4-man teams operating deep behind enemy lines. Across 5 years, around 600 SAS soldiers rotated through Vietnam. Their results: 500 plus confirmed enemy killed. Thousands more indirectly through airstrikes and artillery they guided. Massive amounts of intelligence gathered. Countless Viet Cong operations disrupted. Only 3 SAS killed in action. A kill ratio so high that American analysts actually rechecked the math. Twice. But numbers only tell part of the story. The psychological impact was far more important. If you see them, do not engage. Captured Viet Cong documents from 1969 revealed a shocking order. If you see SAS patrols, do not attack. Report their position and withdraw immediately. They always have support and they never lose. This wasn't true, of course. SAS patrols could be overwhelmed. But perception is everything in guerrilla warfare. To the Viet Cong, the SAS had become something different. They appeared from nowhere. They killed silently. They vanished instantly. They always seemed to know more than they should. They controlled the jungle night. Entire VC units began avoiding areas known to have SAS presence. Some sectors of Phuoc Tuy province became practically VC-free zones, not because of big battles, but because the enemy simply refused to go there anymore. They didn't fear Australian firepower. They feared Australian understanding. Winning without fighting, Sun Tzu once wrote, "To subdue the enemy without fighting is the highest form of warfare." The SAS did exactly that. They didn't just fight the Viet Cong, they unmade them. They broke their confidence, they broke their plans, they broke their control of the jungle, And they did it with patience, silence, and precision, three weapons far more powerful than bullets. When the Australian SAS left Vietnam in 1971, they didn't leave as just another unit rotating home. They left as one of the most effective and feared special forces groups the war had ever seen. They didn't win Vietnam. No single unit could. But they proved something far more important, something modern special forces still study today. Quality beats quantity. Patience beats aggression. Understanding beats firepower. While American strategy focused on body counts, the SAS focused on information, timing, and precision. They showed the world that four silent men in the jungle could achieve strategic results that an entire battalion sometimes couldn't. Their lessons shaped the future. U.S. Rangers, LRRPs, and MACV-SOG adopted their methods. Modern SOF units in Iraq and Afghanistan study their patrol techniques. Jungle warfare schools still teach SAS movement, tracking, and observation. Intelligence-driven warfare became the global standard, but perhaps the greatest legacy is the respect they earned, from friend and enemy alike. A former Viet Cong fighter said it best: "The Americans were powerful, but the SAS were something else. They fought like us, only better." And in the end, it wasn't their rifles, their training, or their kill ratio that made them legendary. It was the fear they created. Fear that the jungle itself had turned against the Viet Cong. Fear that every step could be watched. Fear that the hunters had become the hunted. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you. Your support means everything. This story took time, research, and passion to bring to life, and your view keeps this channel growing. If you enjoyed the video, consider liking, subscribing, and joining us for more deep dives into forgotten battles, special forces legends, and hidden stories from military history. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.